Hello and welcome back to Passing the Torch, an online Bible study with your host and teacher, Bob Clark. That's me. And today is part 3 of a series of lessons called Godly and Practical Wisdom for those considering marriage, or for those who are newlyweds, or for those who are newly empty nesters. So what are we talking about and why? Well, the what is important things to consider before getting married, or sometimes during marriage. So why are we talking about this? Well, those who are considering marriage, it's because there are a lot of issues to consider before getting married if you want marriage to be a good marriage. Those who are newlyweds, because if you've recently married, you are likely finding issues you never thought of and you're having to deal with now. And that's part of life. For those who are newly empty nesters, your last kids just got out of the house, because you've had to consider the children for so long that you may have forgotten how to court each other. And that's an important thing for a marriage to be healthy and good. All right, so let's do this up front. I am not a marriage expert or counselor, certified or otherwise, all right? This is not an end-all teaching, but we'll point out some important things to work through. This lesson does not replace the need for premarital counseling with a godly pastor, and I strongly suggest and urge you to meet with a good pastor before getting married. Let him talk through things with you. Also, I suggest reading, whether you're newly married or thinking about it, or been married for 50 years, I strongly suggest that you get out there and find people that are marriage experts. People like Jimmy Evans, who's in charge of Exo Marriage and the Marriage Today shows on TV and such as that. A lot of really good information to improve your marriage, no matter how good it is already. So I encourage those things. This does not take place of those. This is marriage advice, I guess, from my point of view. So, parental warning. This lesson is meant for mature adults considering marriage or are married. I will not get vulgar in any of the things or try to be offensive in any way, but there's some areas of marriage, you can imagine what, are not appropriate for discussing with children present. So just be warned about that. And it'll take a few minutes to get there, but we will get there. All right, important things to discuss. We've already talked about what is marriage from God's point of view. We've talked about premarital red flags and some red flags during marriage. Today we're talking about important things to discuss. Most of this is to discuss before getting married, but you may find out that you may have been married for a long time and you still need to go back and discuss it some more. So what things are we talking about? Religion, sex, and kids, money, life. These are the things that wind up being danger points in marriage if you're not on the same page. And then next time we'll talk about godly advice for young lovers of all ages. Let's set some expectations, things to think about. So, are you really in love with the person? Or are you in love with the idea of getting or being married? Why do I bring this up? So I'm not trying to be embarrassing about this, but the fact is that a lot of people, especially young people, see marriage as sort of a fulfillment of a fairy tale where everyone lives happily ever after. That's not a valid picture of real marriage. Real marriage is work. It's a lot of excellent payoffs, but it is work. It is not just everybody gets along great with no effort. Do you know, so again, setting expectations, things to think about, and we'll go into these more as we go, all right? Do you know how the person disagrees or argues? That can be an important thing when you get into marriage. Do you agree on important issues? And this is really where we're going to go through a lot of the discussion today. So things like religion, sex, plans for children, tithing, expectations regarding working, saving plans, budgets, time with friends, pets. Do you have a way to make money to provide a place to live, food, clothing, transportation, insurance, entertainment, etc.? Money becomes an important thing in marriage. And if there isn't enough of it, it can hurt a marriage. So that's the kind of things we're going to talk about today. And so let's get into this discussion. We're going to start with religion. Recognize that both of you were raised in different religious environments. Even if you were raised in the same churches, you could have known each other all your lives. But you were raised in different families, hence different religious environments. All right? The best situation is that both of you have started going to the same church. So you know what to expect. You are growing in agreement where a religion is. And I'm using the term religion. What I really mean is your relationship with Christ, okay, with God. If you are going to different churches, it might be difficult to pull these things together. If you're going to different denominations, it might even be more difficult. If you're different religions, let's say one of you is Christian and the other is Jewish or Muslim or Buddhist or whatever, different religions may be a lot more difficult, especially if either or both of you hold firmly held beliefs. It's very difficult to make that work together. So this becomes extremely important for you to work through before getting married. Don't wait till after. On purpose, talk through all the issues regarding religion. For example, what church or churches will you go to? Going to the same church is a very good thing. Going to different churches, even if it's the same denomination, when you are apart from your spouse in a worship service, that's a difficult thing. What church or denomination will the children be raised in? So I know people where the husband was Catholic, the wife was Jewish, the children were raised Jewish. All right? In your discussion, get away from denominational beliefs. In other words, well, my denomination believes this. No. Talk about what you specifically believe. Because most people don't believe everything the denomination believes. They may believe most of it. That's the reason they're going to that church. But understand what you believe and why. I mean, that's part of the reason for this whole set of lessons on passing the torch, is trying to get you to understand what you really believe and why. In your discussions, look for places of agreement. Also look for places where you disagree. Are these places major or minor? Is it something that you can work through? Is it just an opinion? Or is it a difference of Bible interpretation? Is it just the way you've been raised versus what the Bible says? Try to reconcile these things, these differences, and get them down to just minor issues. My wife and I, we don't agree on everything. And that's good. I like to hear her differences because it, as they say, iron sharpens iron. And so when I hear her differences of opinion, it makes me go back and rethink, and what do I really believe? So that's part of what this, discussion about religion is. Start this before you get married. There are some key issues that you need to have resolved before getting married. Growing up spiritually together. So before I get into this, my wife and I met when she was 15 and I was 16. I've been raised in the church all my life and read my Bible all my life for all practical purposes, since I could read. But I had been truly born again the year before we met. My wife was not born again. She did not get born again until we were dating. All right? That may come up later as well. But we started dating when she was 15, I was 16. We, in one sense, raised each other. Yes, the parents were the ones raising us. But we were growing up together. That's a better way to word that. So, growing up spiritually together. Start reading through portions of the Bible at the same time. or together and discuss to understand how you view it. So if you don't know where to start, go look at my series of lessons on how to read the Bible and start from there. Start with the Gospels and such and read through it. Find out what you agree on and what you disagree on. Start praying together, with both of you taking turns praying out loud. So when early in our marriage, I still remember my wife was asked to pray one time in Sunday school. We were married, but she was asked to pray. Her answer, no. The teacher thought that she was joking. No, she did not pray out loud at that time. Now it's a blessing to hear her pray out loud now. So, before you get married, start praying together. If you're already married, start praying together. This is not about finding points to argue over, but to find areas where you agree and where you differ, and why you differ. Trying to resolve differences should send both of you deeper into the Bible to find out what you really believe. Now, there's this term of unequally yoked. Where does that term come from? It comes from Paul's writings in 2 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 14. He said, or he wrote, do not be unequally yoked together with unbelievers. Now, all right, so let me explain the word picture. Yoked. Think of a yoke of oxen. If you have a full-grown, very strong, very large ox, all right? And you have a baby ox that you have put in this same yoke. Well, who's going to do all the pulling? It's the big ox. On top of that, the yoke isn't going to fit very well. You won't be able to pull the plows very well. Understand the word picture? So Paul, going back to what Paul said, do not be unequally yoked together with unbelievers. For what fellowship has righteousness with lawlessness? And what communion has light with darkness? Don't get me wrong, the unbeliever may be a good person with a good heart and everything. But there is a difference between a believer and an unbeliever, especially in the heart itself. The spirit part is what I mean. This is not about one spouse becoming a Christian believer after the wedding, all right? This verse is specifically about before the wedding. What he's saying is do not marry a non-Christian, non-believer, all right? I know you think your case is the exception, but the odds are really against it if you go ahead and marry them. Missionary dating, you know what I mean by that, is dating a non-believer trying to convert them. I don't know that that's what I tried to do. Well, at times I did, I guess, but in my case, it did work. Praise God for that. My wife got born again after a Dallas Home concert, which is was then a contemporary Christian music singer, and she got born again after that concert. But it doesn't always work. Missionary marriages work even less of the time. It's a very difficult issue, especially when you really are in love. I'm not saying that this is for people that aren't in love. I'm assuming that you are. And it is a really difficult issue. If you're in this situation, though, either break it off. That's the difficult part. But if you break it off if you see there's going to be no resolution. All right? Or you allow time to work. Allow the Holy Spirit. Pray for that person. Allow the Holy Spirit to work in them. Don't go jumping into the marriage. So, some of the most difficult marriage circumstances that I've witnessed is when one spouse is a believer and the other isn't. And going a little bit further, it seems like it's really even harder when the husband is the believer with an unbelieving wife. For whatever reason, maybe it's that women are more patient than, in general, than men. But the experiences that I've had where the man was the believer and the woman was not, it's really difficult for him. But what if? So maybe you did get married without listening to Paul's advice about not being unequally yoked. Or maybe you got born again after you got married. Either way, Paul still has a word for you. In 1 Corinthians chapter 7, verses 12 through 16, Paul writes, "But to the rest, I, not the Lord, say, if a brother has a wife who does not believe, and she is willing to live with him, let him not divorce her." In other words, if you're the believer and the spouse is not a believer, and the spouse is willing to stay with you, don't go and divorce them. That's not a reason for divorce. And a woman who has a husband who does not believe, if he is willing to live with her, let her not divorce him. But if the unbeliever departs, all right, let him depart. A brother or sister is not under bondage in such cases, but God has called us to peace. For how do you know, O wife, whether you will save your husband, or whether your actions or your witness will save your husband? Or how do you know, O husband, whether you will save your wife? Paul's rules, so understand this, Paul's rules about staying together do not overrule Jesus' rules about you don't have to put up with extramarital affairs or abuse. All right? Jesus' rules take precedence here. Do not stay together if it's a case of abuse. But if it's not abuse, and the person is willing to stay with you, and you're the believer, stay there. Don't go and get a divorce. All right? Yes, it will be hard at times. As long as it doesn't go into abuse, though, you have a chance to witness to that person. All right, changing subjects. I'm going to talk about the three-letter word, sex. This is not going to be graphic, okay? Hopefully. But it is straightforward. Because sex is one of the greatest yet most difficult things to get right in a marriage. Just being honest here. Why? Because there's things like timing and tiredness and different libidos. All right, three sort of separate things here, but you understand different libidos and such. Tiredness. So if you're not married, if you are not experienced in these things, you come home from work and you're tired. You want to rest first. But if your spouse has not just come home from work, maybe they're not. So getting all this stuff right, when? Is it morning, tonight, at night, when you come home, whatever. Who initiates it and how? Deciding what is acceptable and what is not. How to keep it from becoming mundane without crossing boundaries. Okay? Issues of pornography. Sex before marriage. That's a reality, right? Whether it's your fiancé or others. Jealousy and limits on contact with the opposite sex. It's difficult. Let's get real here. It's difficult if you marry as virgins. It's often much more difficult if you're not. I didn't say always, but often. There's a reason God said to not have sex before marriage. We hear this so much, the church, you should stay a virgin before getting married. But why? Because it makes things more difficult. God knew that sex is hard enough without convoluting it with other issues that fornication brings. So let's get real about this issue. No matter what we've heard, no matter what we've been preached at, by parents, by churches, preachers, whatever, by the time many people these days and for years decide that they are ready for marriage, they've already had sex. That's the reality, right? They've had it with each other. Often they've had it with other partners. These are the kind of things that you might have to work through then. There's this shame and or embarrassment over previous sexual acts. Even if it's only with the person that you're about to marry, all right? There's still this background of shame of why did I do that? Why didn't I wait? All right? If you've had sex with previous partners, there's always this potential for comparison with those previous partners. And more importantly, there's your spouse thinking that you are thinking about comparing them to the previous partners. So how do you get beyond these things? It requires grace. Fortunately, that's what Jesus came to do. He came to get rid of our pasts, right? To get rid of our sins, to get rid of our shame. In Colossians chapter 2, Paul writes in verses 13 and 14, "And you, being dead in your trespasses and the uncircumcision of your flesh, he has made alive together with him, having forgiven all your trespasses." Okay, trespasses, old term. All your sins. Jesus forgave all those things. "Having wiped out the handwriting of requirements that was against us." Is that cool or what? He wiped out, King James is blotted out, the handwriting of requirements that was against us, which was contrary to us. It was against us. And he has taken it out of the way, having nailed it to the cross. So these issues about sex before marriage and such, talk about these issues before getting married. Don't hold secrets. Don't lie. If you've had sex before your fiancé, talk about it. Be honest. Don't be vulgar, but be honest. Also, if you're the one listening to this, listening to your fiancé go through things that they've done, don't keep asking questions beyond what you can handle. For most of us, we don't need the details. All right? It will make us mad or hurt us emotionally or something. So don't ask beyond what you can handle. That makes sense? Be loving. Be grace-filled. And also, I started to say but, and also understand who this person is that you're planning on marrying. All right, sex and marriage for those who are already married. Regarding sex. Now, you hear what I said, for those already married, right? Regarding sex, do not deprive your spouse. 1 Corinthians chapter 7, verses 3 through 5, Paul's writing, "Let the husband render to his wife the affection due her, and likewise also the wife to her husband." Let me put that in plain English. Don't withhold sex from your spouse. That word affection goes beyond that though, all right? Affection. Affirmation. It can be affirming words. It can be being gentle, being intimate. That's not necessarily sex, all right? Those kind of things. Husbands, render to your wife the affection due her. But remember, it does include sex. And likewise also to the wife to her husband. The wife does not have authority over her own body. So this, he's making sure he's tying it back to the sex part. But the husband does. And likewise, the husband does not have authority over his own body. But the wife does. Do not deprive one another, that is of sex, except with consent for a time, that you may give yourselves to fasting and prayer and come together again so that Satan does not tempt you because of your lack of self-control. Okay, let's get straightforward. Sex is not a weapon. It is not to be used for manipulation. All right? Sex is meant to be enjoyable by both spouses. It is not to be abused. It is not to bring abuse into the marriage. It It is meant to be enjoyable. Sex is not to be withheld from your spouse, but it also doesn't have to be at the drop of the hat. It doesn't have to include everything the person wants to include, especially if it's outside of your boundaries. Discuss. Work through these things. One spouse doesn't always get their own way and the other has to do what that spouse says. You're to be together, right? If the other person, if it really bothers the other person to do something or another, don't. Be understanding, all right? If you don't like that answer, take it to God in prayer. Say, God, if this is not against your rules of or what you consider right and wrong, could you let my spouse know that? I guess I've never thought about it in those terms before, but maybe that's for somebody out there. All right, sex and birth control. I know that some of this stuff that I'm going through isn't exactly churchy, if you will, but is important for marriage, and that's what I'm trying to do right now, is give godly advice for marriage. All right? Birth control may seem straightforward, but you should discuss it really before marriage. And if you've waited till you get married, okay, you still need to discuss it. Things to consider. So birth control pills taken for an extended time can have significant effects that make it difficult to conceive later. Other forms of birth control modify how it feels. All right? Some forms of birth control are considered to be abortion by some. You two need to discuss and research. That's my main point, or next point here. Research and discuss the issue together. Come to a conclusion together. Okay, here's a caution. When you're talking about things related to sex, it's really better to do those things by phone instead of being tempted in the heat of the moment. Because if you're talking about sex, you have things going over in your mind, and if you will, the temperature's rising, and it's real easy to get pulled into going beyond where you want to stop. All right? So talk over the phone for these kind of things. Another thing, sex leads to kids, right? For most people. All right? I don't want to be hurtful or painful for those that are having problems becoming pregnant and you want to be. All right? So please forgive me if I come across that way, but that's not what I mean. So have frank discussions about kids before getting married. Don't wait until after you're married to throw this discussion. Do you want to have children? Yes or no? If yes, how many? And how soon? Do you believe in spanking? All right, so your answers to all of these things may change, but you need to have the discussion. So do you believe in spanking? If yes, then under what conditions? It's not just for everything, right? If no, then what type of discipline do you plan for willful disobedience? We're not talking about just breaking the lamp. We're talking about you tell the child, do not do that, and they're doing it right in front of you, right? So what are you planning on doing? Let me give you this, since it's supposed to be godly advice. The biblical answer to this is spanking applied correctly and lovingly, without anger and abuse, is correct in raising children. There are many good Christian books about how to raise children, not the least of which is The Strong-Willed Child by Dr. James Dobson. James Dobson has a number of other, really good books about raising children and such as that. We have at least one child who is extremely strong-willed, and the fastest I ever saw my wife read was when she had just been fed up one day. She calls me at work, and you've got to do something about that child. And so on the way home, I got Strong-Willed Child by James Dobson. She devoured the book. So talk through some of these things. Just to let you know, I said before that you're going to have answers to these questions right now. They may change later. So one of my daughters swore up and down that she would never spank her child. Now she has children, but she knows how to do it, right? If you're planning on having children, you better start saving. Goes over in the money issue, right? Let's list some of the things. Prenatal doctor or midwife, which is happening more and more these days, it seems. Hospital or birthing center. These things cost, right? Pediatrician after the child is born. Clothes. Oh, by the way, kids grow quickly. That means you buy the kid clothes 1 month, and 1, 2, 3 months later, you're buying them clothes again, right? Baby furniture, toys, babysitting, daycare, school. Another thing to talk about. Are you willing for your child to go to public school? Private school. Again, high dollar thing these days for most private schools. Homeschooling. What makes the most sense for your circumstances? And then if they go to college or technical school, I should have put that in the text here. All kids shouldn't go to college. Some should go to technical school or whatever else, or should just go to work. But if you're planning on raising your children to go to college, you better start, saving, paying for your children's marriage. Okay, I'm not trying to scare you or dissuade you from having children or having however many you want. I've got 5 children, right? 6, if you include our daughter who's already in heaven, which I do. All right? It does cost a lot of money. I'm just suggesting or asking you to include children in your discussions, especially about money. Other thing to talk about with kids, if you have family close by and they are able to babysit or provide daycare or whatever, discuss things like, who do you both trust? And also, how do you provide family members, grandparents, with appropriate grandchildren time? All right? You may not trust one or both sets of your parents. It's a little different. But if you do, how do you provide them with adequate time, especially if they're close by? I am extremely fortunate that my daughter and son-in-law and grandchildren live very close. So I get to play with my grandchildren at least once a week, and that is such a blessing. Discuss these kind of things. So let's go into the money thing from here. Tithing, maybe one of the most important things. If you believe in the God of the Bible, I strongly encourage you to tithe. This is not a lesson on tithing, but what is tithing? It is giving 10% of your gross income, that's before taxes, to God, typically through the local church. God can help you take better care of the 90% that you keep than you can take care of the whole 100% if you don't tithe. I have seen that so many times. So where do we get this idea of tithing? So it's throughout the Bible, but the one place where you can really point to is in the last chapter of what we call the Old Testament or the Tanakh. I said last chapter, last book. Is Malachi, or if you're Italian, Malachi. Got to say that with that accent, right? Malachi chapter 3, verses 8 through 12. Will a man rob God? This is Malachi writing God's words, okay? Will a man rob God? Yet you have robbed me. But you say, in what way have we robbed you? In tithes and offerings. You are cursed with a curse, for you have robbed me, even this whole nation. Goes on in verse 10. Bring all the tithes into the storehouse. That's why I say local church, right? That there may be food in my house. And try me now in this. It's one of the very few places where God says, no, test me on this. Now try me now in this, says the Lord of hosts. If I will not open for you the windows of heaven and pour out for you such blessing that there will not be room enough to receive it. Now, we don't always recognize what form that blessing is. That's a different set of lessons, but God will so overabundantly bless you if you tithe. And I will rebuke the devourer for your sakes, so that he will not destroy the fruit of your ground. Nor shall the vine fail to bear fruit for you in the field, says the Lord of hosts. And all the nations will call you blessed, for you will be a delightful land, says the Lord of hosts. Talk about these things and be on the same page. All right, let's keep going. Money, other areas to discuss. You really need to talk about money because money can cause problems later. Things like who does the bills, who pays the bills. Understand this is often stressful. It is real easy to procrastinate, especially when tired or stressed. So if you've had a long day at work and you come home, you're really not wanting to pay attention to the bills. So I'm going to open up my marriage to you a little bit in this area. So when we got married, I'm the one who paid all the bills and such. Engineer. I think in terms of math, right? So spreadsheets and whatever else. Oh, by the way, there wasn't really spreadsheets on the computer at the time. This was the days before Microsoft Excel. All right, this was done by hand, doing spreadsheets and such. And I would do things, but I would come home from work. I was tired from work. I was stressed out because we never had enough money and we were late on making our payments and such as that. Finally, I realized that this was impacting my health. And so I said, I'm going to have to just hold my breath and let my wife do it, because at the time, she may have been working, but she wasn't working at the same 40 hours that I was working, right? So she took over doing the bills. I was scared of what was going to happen. But it is amazing how quickly she got us caught up on all of our bills. And I can't say that we're out of debt right now, but at one point we were out of debt except for a house payment. And it was because she had taken over. So sometimes you got to work through things like this, right? Savings. How much are you going to save? Here's a suggestion. Save 10% or more. Where are you going to save it? How are you going to save it? 401ks, etc. Bank accounts. You're going to have a common bank account or separate accounts. In my mind, why would a married couple need a separate bank account? There are reasons. But talk through it. Understand what those reasons are. All right? The one reason not to have separate accounts is because of hiding things from your spouse. Don't do that. Here is some very, very important advice if you're not married yet. Do not open a common bank account or a loan or co-sign a loan before you're legally married. Now, if you do, things may work out just fine. I know a case in point, a friend of mine at work who had to pay $9,000 for a wrecked motorcycle because his daughter co-signed a loan with her then fiancé, who wrecked the motorcycle, then ran out on her. And so the dad has to pay for all of that. So don't co-sign a loan beforehand. All right, let's keep going. Money, where work is concerned. I could go great in depth in here, and it's going to sound like I'm being nitpicky and such. Please accept this advice at the level that makes sense for you. Can the guy keep a decent job? Whatever, different people's idea of decent is different, okay? But can the guy keep a decent job, or is he being fired every 6 weeks or whatever? If he can't keep a decent job, why? Is it because of circumstances? There are some times where he got hired on and right after that they had a layoff. All right? That, corporate-wide layoff, whatever. The guy can't help that. Or is it his fault? Does he wind up getting fed up every 6 weeks or get angry with the boss every 6 weeks? Does he have excuses to make for these things, or is it real circumstances? So understand those things. Don't marry him until he proves he is reliable. Okay? Now, why am I picking on the guy here? Well, I'm the wife, or I will be the wife, and I can work just as well. Okay, maybe so, but, okay, we'll get there. In 2 Thessalonians, Paul writes, "For even when we were with you, we commanded you this: if anyone will not work, neither shall he eat." He really means the men in this case. Think of the culture, all right? He's talking to the men. If the man is not going to work, neither shall he eat. Again, put an asterisk. We're going to come back to that. In 1 Timothy chapter 5, Paul writes, "But if anyone does not provide for his own, and especially for those of his household, he has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever." So, the guy has been told by God through Paul, and you can find other places, that he is the one to provide. It doesn't mean that he has to be the one to do the work, but he has to be the one in charge of providing. So if either partner is in school, let's take some other pieces of this. If either partner is in school, where will the financial support come from? All right? It doesn't mean that it has to be the guy to do the work. It means that he is responsible. That's probably the key word here, okay? It is true that many have gone through school while working. I know plenty, right? But it is difficult. It's even more difficult when you're married and working. It's even more difficult when married, working, and have children. It can work. I have seen it work. But it becomes difficult. If there is a way where you can legitimately put off getting married until you're out of school, for most people that's a preferred way of doing things. All right? Make sure that your school major will eventually pay the bills. There are a lot of high-priced school majors, school diplomas now that will not get you a reasonable paying job. All right, so make sure you're going into something that will eventually pay the bills. So, will the wife work outside the home after marriage or after kids? You see, what we read before from Paul's writings, the man is the one who is responsible to make sure that everything is provided for. But especially in this modern world, if the wife can make 2, 3, 4 times more salary than the husband, which happens at times, and the both of you decide that the husband will stay home and take care of the children instead of the wife, okay, that's fair. But work on that together. Decide on that together. All right? Can you accept your future spouse's work? Important thing to question. So the spouse may be working odd hours or travel a lot, military or travel for long periods of time, like military deployment. All right? Frequent moving, as in military, or jokingly, IBM. At one point, IBM stood, the employees there, which my father-in-law was an IBM employee, it stood for I've been moved, because he moved a number of times during my wife's childhood. Dangerous jobs. So maybe your spouse is in the military, or a policeman, or police person, a fireman, firewoman, whatever it's called. Can you handle that? When that spouse goes out to do their dangerous job every day, can you handle? Is there going to be fear that jumps up in you every day? That's what you need to identify. Okay, more stuff about money. Make a budget and see if you are on the same page. So in the process of doing that budget, so it might not be just a budget for today. Make one for, or as soon as you get married, right? But then make one for a little bit further down the road and a little bit further down the road. Talk about timing. A helpful resource for learning about how to use and put together a budget, Dave Ramsey and all of his stuff. Lots of information that's out there on that. Some people are afraid of budgets. Do not be. If you take care of money things, you do some kind of budgeting one way or another, whether it's on paper or in your head. My suggestion here, my advice here, put it on paper, talk through things where you're seeing if you're on the same page or not. Because at the end of the day, you need to be pretty close. So talk about housing, your immediate needs. Most people, so even though I said housing, that includes apartments, right? So immediately after you get married, are you going to buy a house immediately? One of you already have a house? Are you going to move into an apartment? If so, where? How safe is it? Talk through those things. Over a period of time, so especially if you move into an apartment or you have a house in a bad part of town and you want to move, upgrade, move into a safer part of town or whatever. Talk through those things. Well, what would I like to do? When I move into a house or a better house, what kind of house do I want? Some people are really good with a really tiny house on a really tiny lot because they don't have to clean up as much or cut the grass. I like a big house and a big lot and everything like that. So also include in your budget discussions is maintenance for a house, right? So who's cutting the grass? Are you going to pay for somebody? Cars. So a lot of times when you're ready to get married, both of you already have cars. Not always, different circumstances, but talk through this thing about cars. Discuss what styles you like. So if one of you loathes trucks and the other loves trucks, talk about that. A new thing here is the electric vehicles. Some people are vehemently against electric vehicles. Some of them are vehemently against gasoline vehicles. Talk through it. What about new vehicles versus used vehicles? You drive off the lot, the price of most vehicles drops by, 10, 15, 25% as soon as it gets bought and driven off the lot. Talk about saving for that next vehicle. Here's a suggestion. In talking about things like houses and cars and such, they sell books that give amortization schedules. You can also find this in Microsoft Excel, has ways of bringing up and calculating amortization schedules. That means that amortization schedule, you're going to pay, whatever the number is, $500 a month, and the interest rate is 10%. So how much you're actually paying down each month, and how long will it take you to pay it off, etc. So get one of these schedules and figure out how to use it and let it help you do this budget. So in doing budgeting, insurance, very important. Home or apartment insurance, auto insurance, life insurance, utilities, electricity, water, sewer, trash, phone, TV, all of these things. Talk through the issues. Food. Are you going to eat out a lot? Eat in? Who likes to cook? Talk through it. Gas or fuel. And, I think in terms of fuel is gasoline or diesel, but especially up north, fuel can be home heating fuel, right? So all of these impact budgets. Entertainment. How often and what kind of entertainment will fit into your budget? Oh, well, we're going to start off and we're not going to have any entertainment. Wrong answer. The human mind doesn't work that way. You've got to have some kind of entertainment. It might be books. It might be television. It might be movies, whatever. You've got to find something. Toys. Discuss the priority, not only the cost, but the priority of your hobbies. That's what I mean by toys. So some people like fixing up cars. That can be expensive. Some people like golf. That can be expensive. Some people like flying. That can be expensive. There are other hobbies that are not as in-your-face expensive, but they add up depending on, collectors of various kinds. Over time, those things can add up to money. Another thing on the budget is, as we've already mentioned, is children. Make sure you include that. And over time periods, right? So, money. The wedding. Make a wedding budget and see if you're on the same page. This is really important. Do you want a big wedding or a small wedding? Simple versus extravagant? Are you going to do a, what's it called nowadays? A travel wedding where you go on a vacation at the same time and go to, have a wedding in Colorado or whatever, and your wedding party has to go there and meet you? Or are you going to elope? Large extravagant weddings at expensive venues, that is okay if you have the money. All right? I'm not trying to nix that. But if you're no more married that way than if you have a simple wedding at church or even in your backyard. The size of the wedding doesn't make you more married, is what I'm saying. Nothing is wrong with spending a lot unless you don't have a lot. Don't go spending a lot if you don't have it. Don't go into extreme debt over a wedding. A small diamond in an engagement ring or even another stone is just as lasting as a large diamond. You don't need a 1.5 carat ring to be engaged. Many weddings today cost more than down payments on houses. Again, I'm not trying to nix that. Talk about it. See if you're on the same page. So remember, a wedding day or a wedding is one day plus the photos, if you have photos and if they turn out well. In doing these discussions, don't assume, talk it out. I'm not trying to talk you into or out of anything. I just want you to talk and make sure you're on the same page. I know a couple that after the venue was set up and a number of expensive things were done, they then talked and found out, oh, she really didn't need the expensive wedding. She wasn't looking forward to the expensive wedding. She would have been satisfied with just a small private affair. All right, so life. In-laws and outlaws. In Genesis chapter 2, verse 24, therefore shall a man leave his father and mother and shall cleave unto his wife, and they shall be one flesh. Don't plan on running home to mom or dad every time your spouse does something you don't like. This is one area where I am very thankful for my mother-in-law. When we got married, my wife would want to pick up the phone and call her and start talking about all sorts of bad things that Bob was doing and such. And my mother-in-law used great wisdom and said, now, honey, you need to talk to your husband about that. And about that kind of attitude in the way she said it. I am very thankful that she did that. Work on your relationship with future in-laws before getting married to the best of your ability. I know sometimes that can be like hugging a porcupine, right? But to the best of your ability, work on that. Also, don't allow your parents to put down your future spouse or your spouse, especially after getting married. If they start going down that road of putting them down, stop them. That's not appropriate. However, if you're not married yet, listen carefully to what they're saying, what your parents are saying. Because in some cases, they're seeing something in your partner that you should really be aware of. But weigh that with wisdom. All right? Are they saying that because they really see something? Or are they saying that because their personality and your future spouse's personality just don't get along? Are they saying that because they are guessing at what that person will turn out like? Think through those things, listen to them, and then at some point you have to decide if you're going to accept their input or reject it. But don't just say, they're saying that, or don't discard their true wisdom, but understand why they're saying what they're saying. All right, life, relationships with current friends. Real adult life does not look like an episode of Friends. How much time will you spend with your current friends after marriage? That's really an important thing to think through. So again, therefore shall a man leave his father and mother, or anything else that is taking you away from time with your spouse, or I think you understand what I mean, and shall cleave unto his wife, and they shall be one flesh. It's not about just leaving parents, but about leaving those things which will interfere with the two of you becoming one. It's a better way of saying it than what I started to a moment ago. Occasional time with friends is not bad, but routine or frequent girls' nights out or guys' poker nights can interfere with the spouse. All right? If you're going to have, what's worse than that is taking many weekends together with your friends, a hunting trip every once in a while, whatever. But if this is a routine thing, a recurring thing over and over, you need to discuss this. Don't let friends interfere with your relationship. All right? And here's a big caution in that. An unmarried or non-Christian friend, it could be a Christian married friend, or a Christian unmarried friend, or a non-Christian friend, whether they're married or not. That's not a good source of marriage advice. All right? So when they're trying to give you marriage advice, I'm not saying don't listen, judge it. Is this making sense or not? All right, so life. Pets. This may sound like a silly issue, but what type and number of pets? Is this a cat-only person? Is this a dog person? Some people that matters. If it doesn't matter, okay. But if it matters, talk about it and just make sure you're on the same page. If both of you work, what will you do with pets during the day if you're going to have pets? It may have a big effect on money if this includes doggy daycare, which a lot of people are doing. Make sure your budget accounts for animals. Right? That's the most important thing here. Now, are you compatible? That's a word that we use a lot today. Well, especially in divorce court, right? Well, we're just not compatible. Incompatible is not a valid biblical reason for getting divorced. It's not. What do you mean by compatible? So I want you to think some here now. Do you mean common interests? Common hobbies? Common movie likes? Common love of outdoors or hiking or whatever? Is that what you mean? Compatibility or things in common. It does not require a lot of common interests for being compatible, if you will, in marriage. It only takes a few things that can occasionally bring you smiles together. It might be as simple as sitting on the couch watching movies together. All right? Make a deliberate effort to find things in common that you both enjoy. So, church, kids, music, food, studying genealogy. That's one of the things that I, over the past 6 to 8 months, I've really enjoyed. My wife, not so much, but she enjoys seeing me happy, learning about all these things. And she'll sit there and listen to me. Complementary versus common interests. So, what I just told you about. My interest in looking up genealogy stuff. Her complementary interest is seeing me excited. Does that make sense? It sounds sort of odd, but it really is a real thing. In your efforts to find things in common, deliberately put the phone down and have routine discussions. Talk and listen. Things like, what was your day like? And this is one thing that my wife started, I don't know, a year or more. It may have been several years ago. Often, as I'm on my way out to work, she'll say, is there anything that I can do for you today? Is there some way that I can help you today? And so most of the time the answer is no. But every once in a while she reminds me, oh, she could do that. And so she is able to bless me by doing that. And even the question blesses me. So find ways of doing that. And it doesn't matter, wife to husband or husband to wife. Find ways to bless your spouse. We've went through a lot of things today. Things to think through, things to discuss and such. So use this sort of as a guide. All of these things may not affect you, but most likely a lot of them do. So talk, listen, get on the same page. So next time we're going to talk about godly advice for young lovers of all ages. And there's some of the advice that comes in that's probably the most important piece of this whole set of lessons, especially if you're not married yet. I hope to see you next time on Passing the Torch. So long.